False start.
Delay of game.
Just mouth words and it'll drive the sound guy crazy.
Hello, my name is Mitchell DePriest, and I am a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending this evening's program. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, and plan an SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you're a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoy this evening's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. To view past programs, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. A video of tonight's presentation will be available on our website soon. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. And finally, if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers here in the hall and they can assist. And now, please welcome Director Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Thanks to all of you for coming out. For those of you who come to a lot of our programs here, I would just say that Associate Director Barbara Ballard is taking a very deserved break after a very long legislative session, so she's not with us tonight, but I wanted to let you know that. I have been looking forward to tonight's program since last July. Now, the reason for that is last July at Senator Bob Dole's 90th birthday party, which was in the U.S. Capitol, which was attended by 700 very interesting people, I ran into Mr. Cook, and he looks at me, and I don't believe he said, "How are you doing, Bill?" or "What's going on, Bill?" or anything. He says, "Bill, when are you going to invite me back to the Dole Institute?"
Exactly true.
And I said, "You got it." So we've been working since then, and it's our great honor to have Charlie back tonight for the second time at the Dole Institute. You have a bio that tells you all the details about Charlie. What I thought I would do is share some things that aren't part of the bio that you may not know about him.
Uh-oh.
He is, that's right, he's America's foremost cephalogist. If you need to go to your Funkin' Wagnalls to know what a cephalogist is, I would understand that.
It starts with a P.S., though.
Yes, it's P.S. He is a huge fan of Senator Bob Dole. In 2006, he was inducted into the Louisiana Political Museum's Political Hall of Fame. He served as a resident fellow at the Harvard Institute of Politics in spring 2013. And the Wall Street Journal once dubbed Charlie the Picasso of election analysis. Please welcome Mr. Charlie Cook.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Charlie, it's great to have you back tonight. Thank you so much. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your upbringing and your education and how you got into election forecasting?
Sure, Bill. First of all, it really is a pleasure to be here. And gosh, I think we have a bigger crowd tonight than the other time I was here. But thank you all for coming out. It sort of justifies my existence here. Betty and I and my other sister Carol and Bob, our brother, Grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I was a high school debater and got recruited to do research work for a man from my hometown who was running for the U.S. Senate, Bennett Johnston, who ended up getting elected, I should say. But I was recruited because I was a debater and knew how to do research the congressional record and CQ and things like that. And came to Washington. I'd already gotten into Georgetown and worked on Capitol Hill. My first job was as an elevator operator in the U.S. Senate, January to June of '73, and which is when I actually met Senator Dole for the first time. And they had these old rickety elevators in the Russell Senate office building that some of you probably been in, where to go up you turn this, it was this handle, and you turned it this way to go up, and this way to go down. In the Dirksen building, it was modern. It actually had buttons. But anyway, it was a great experience. And then interned on the Hill and started working on Capitol Hill and worked in some campaigns, worked as a pollster. And in the early 80s, I found myself voting for Republicans almost half the time. And I wasn't becoming a Republican, I was becoming a swing voter. And so I was trying to figure out how could I figure out a way to make a living in politics but not work for either side. That was before Dick Morris made it fashionable to work both ways. And so I did, and started my business 30 years ago this month. And so it's been a fun ride and a great opportunity to meet all kinds of fun and interesting people and do things like this. But I should say that in my normal pajama rotation, my Robert J. Dole Institute of Politics t-shirt with the iconic flag on it is in the rotation for my pajama tops from last visit here.
We'll see if we can find another one for you. So,
extra large.
yes.
Unless you have a double X.
Let me before we get to the main discussion tonight. I know you expressed, as I shared at the senator's birthday, a desire to come back. I know you're just very fond of Bob Dole. So just share a few of your thoughts about that.
Well, two things that stick out, and well, one I'm definitely going to tell, and one I'll have to decide. I haven't had any alcohol, but which would have. Back in 1994, it was the Sunday before that big election when Republicans took over control of the House for the first time in 40 years, you remember. And I was on Meet the Press. There were three guests that Sunday that Tim Russert had on, Vice President Al Gore and Senator Bob Dole, and yours truly. And it was really fun to sit in the green room backstage before the broadcast and then sit there with, I think Vice President Gore went first, so I sat there with Senator Dole while he gave a running commentary on what Vice President Gore was saying. And then vice versa, and then we all went out on the set towards the end of the show. But things like, Albert, you're lying. It was awesome. I mean, the thing is, they should have had a second track on Meet the Press, this green room camera with Bob Dole doing the commentary. That it was fabulous. But another time, and I was telling your archivist this afternoon, back in 2000, I did a panel, dog and pony show in Chicago with Senator Dole, and it was just amazing. I mean, to be on a stage, just the two of us, it was like, I know why he's here. I don't know why I'm here. But on the way back, he asked me if I wanted a ride. He had the PepsiCo corporate jet. And, it beat a coach flight back from Chicago to D.C. So, but it was just really fun. But I mentioned that our father was a bomber pilot in the 8th Air Force in World War II. And we just talked, he asked me a bunch of questions. And then as we were about to land, he said, would you write down your father's name and address and stuff, which I did. And about a week or two later, my dad got this package. It was this wonderful personal letter from Senator Dole with a World War II memorial ball cap and a program from the groundbreaking. And that just meant an enormous amount to my dad. But well, okay, I'll tell you the other one. Nobody in the story is going to be running for office. At that 2000 time, both on the panel and on the plane back, Senator Dole had great difficulty hiding his disdain for the Republican nominee for president, George W. Bush. it was, let's just say, a minimum high regard. And he really had some difficulty repressing some of his views. Now, granted, Bush had beaten his wife, Elizabeth Dole, earlier that year and stuff, and Senator Dole kind of made it to the top in politics the hard way, and President Bush got there, had a little bit easier route. But anyway, but that was fun. I mean, I've never seen anyone where there was a bigger gap between the image that some people had of him and his private self. It's just one of the funniest people and most compassionate people I've ever met.
Okay, we're headed into a very important midterm election, the second midterm for the president's 2 terms in office. What are the most important factors that are going to affect the outcome of those those individual elections?
Well, I think there's some factors and there's some forces, and the factors, this is almost like in the House is not going to move much. I mean, when you've got 93% of all the Republicans in the House are in districts that Mitt Romney carried, and 96% of all the Democrats in the House are in districts that President Obama carried, there's not a lot of elasticity there, not a lot of give. But when you're looking at the Senate, it's almost like it's a perfect storm of factors there sort of aimed at Democrats. I mean, first, the seats that are up, Democrats have 21, Republicans only have 15. So there's just greater numerical exposure, but that's not that important. But more importantly is that the Democratic seats that are up are disproportionately in very, very, very conservative states. And to give you an example, Republicans, the Senate's 55-45. So Republicans, if they got a 5-seat net gain, it'd be 50-50 with Vice President Biden breaking a tie. So Republicans need 6. If Republicans if they only picked up Democratic seats that Mitt Romney carried by 14 points or more, they could get a majority in the Senate. There are 6 Democratic seats up in danger that Romney carried by 14 or more points, which is sort of a landslide by any definition, so that the map just works really, really, really against Democrats. And the third thing is the turnout dynamics. You look at a presidential year now, and it looks sort of broadly like the country, but in midterm elections, the turnout, it's older, it's wider, it's more conservative, it's more Republican, and so there's a real difference. And so this being a midterm election, that's working against Democrats as well. Back in the old days, when senior citizens voted a lot more Democratic, it was sort of offsetting, but now that seniors are the age group that votes most heavily Republican, it's sort of widened that differential between midterms. So, and then you've got your president's job approval rating. It's been in the 40 to 44% range since October, and that's not a good place to be. And finally, Democratic voters just aren't as enthusiastic as Republican voters are this year. So it's tough. It's tough. I would say that the governorships is the one place where Democrats actually may pick up a few seats, but in the House they'll probably lose, somewhere between 1 and 10, and the Senate, right now it looks a little bit more likely than not that Republicans will win a majority.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to ask you tonight, the president's job rating is down, like you said, in the low 40s, but it's a lot higher than job ratings for Congress. So how does that play out in the elections?
Well, if you just put Congress on a ballot, it'd lose about 85-15. But Congress, but I mean, the old people used to say people hate Congress, but they love their congressman. I'd say now people hate Congress, and most of them tolerate their congressman. I mean, so it's a little bit, the sort of sense of affection that a lot of people used to have for their members, Democrat or Republican, is largely gone. That's just sort of, it's almost like a meaningless thing. It's who that person is. And some pollsters have started asking if there were an option on the ballot that would throw out every member of Congress, would you do that? And even that number is starting to get pretty high. Thankfully for most members of Congress, that option isn't there. So.
Okay. Now, Republicans have arguably lost 5 Senate seats in the last 2 election cycles because they nominated the wrong candidates. Are there any possibilities, any states where that could happen in 2014?
It's looking less likely. My wife, Lucy, is trying to get me to stop using the term wacko. So I'm going with exotic and potentially problematic. And, you know, we saw that with, you remember Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who did the ad saying, "I am not a witch," and Sharon Angle in Nevada, and Todd Aiken last time next door in Missouri, and Richard Murdoch in Indiana. And it could happen, but it seems less likely. I mean, if it happens anywhere, it could happen in Georgia, which is one of the only 2 Republican Senate seats with any vulnerability. And there are basically like 8 Republicans running, and 6 of them would probably win it, and 2 of them could seize defeat from the jaws of victory. And I mean, the Democrats actually have a decent nominee, but it's still a state that Romney carried by 8 points. So it's still a lot more Republican than not. But Mississippi, if a Republican incumbent loses a primary anywhere, it'd be in Mississippi with Thad Cochran. But I think that Cochran's going to hold on. But there are a couple places. North Carolina, Republicans have the Speaker of the House is their likely nominee. But if he, I don't think he's going to get upset. But there are a couple places where they have more problematic people running, but I don't think they're going to win the nomination.
Okay. Can you walk us through the key Senate races and start with the 6 or 7 Democratic seats that are really in trouble?
Yeah, okay, remember 6 seats is what what Republicans need. And there are 3 retirements in states that are, it's probably South Dakota is just a gimme putt for Republicans, where Democratic Senator Tim Johnson is retiring, and Democrats have no chance, and they pretty much admit it. And then after that, Montana and West Virginia are pretty much the same place. They just are less likely to admit it. So Republicans get halfway to a majority, assuming they don't lose any of their own seats, just with the 3 open seats that are pretty easy. And then after that, you've got Mark Begich in Alaska, Mark Pryor in Arkansas, Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, and Kay Hagan in North Carolina, 4 Democratic incumbents in states where Romney all won, North Carolina the least of which, where Romney won by 2 points. But they're all very, very Republican states, and where the president's approval ratings would be in the 30s, and very, very, very difficult. And then there are a couple other places we're looking at. So Republicans have, and they're actually in Colorado, Republicans had a weak candidate, and they did a flip and brought in a much better candidate. So with Cory Gardner against Mark Udall. So Republicans have those 3 opens, and then 5 good chances to knock off Democratic incumbents. And then we'll see about New Hampshire with Jeanne Shaheen now that Scott Brown's in. But most of the polling we're seeing is not quite as close as those other races.
Yeah, that's a good setup for my next question. So in a wave election year, if it turns out to be a wave like, say, 94, 2006, maybe 2010, what would happen potentially in New Hampshire and even Virginia?
Yeah, in a wave, you have people who normally wouldn't have a particularly difficult race, either losing or almost losing, and then sometimes you have people that you wouldn't think might, could end up losing. So Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire would be the first. Mark Warner in Virginia. Virginia is a state that's transitioning. It used to be a southern state. Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. And now it's a mid-Atlantic state. Obama carried it twice. Every statewide elected official is a Democrat. No, I think that's a little misleading because it really is very much of a swing state. But Mark Warner could lose to Ed Gillespie there. And then we'd start looking at, if it were a Republican wave, maybe look at Al Franken in Minnesota would probably be the next one. it'd have to be an awfully big wave to get to Jeff Merkley in Oregon. But there are 2 Republican seats that are in jeopardy, Georgia that I mentioned already, and then the other is Mitch McConnell. And it's not that Kentucky is a Democratic or a liberal state, because it certainly isn't. But right now, if you took a poll, it'd be McConnell and Allison Grimes, the 35-year-old Secretary of State. This is her first elective office. McConnell has a Tea Party opponent in the primary, but that's not an issue. But right now it's like 45, 45, 46, 46. And it's not so much that McConnell is too conservative, too Republican for the state. McConnell's not a warm and fuzzy guy. I mean, he's a kind of a pretty business-like kind of guy. And business-like is a nice way of saying it. But and he only won by 3 percentage points last time. If McConnell loses, and I kind of think he'll eke it out and win, but I think it would be because there were 3 or more percentage points of people in Kentucky now versus 6 years ago that would vote against any leader in Congress, either party. And you remember Tom Daschle was the Democratic leader in South Dakota. He lost not that long ago, and Harry Reid almost lost to a really weak candidate. That being really, really powerful in an institution that people have started hating, it's not necessarily a prize.
You referenced it, but I'd like you to really dwell on this, because a really fascinating Democratic opportunities in the state of Georgia.
Yes. There are, as I said, there are 8 Republicans running, and 3 of them are members of Congress. And 2 of them, one of them, Jack Kingston, I think if it was a Jack Kingston, Michelle Nunn race, it'd be pretty close, but I think Kingston, the Republican, would probably hold on. But if Paul Brown or Phil Gingrey, the other 2 Republican House members who, let's just say if they aren't on Todd Aiken's Christmas card list, they ought to be. They have a propensity to say unfortunate things that could get them into trouble. The thing to remember about Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia to a lesser extent, North Carolina, and to a lesser extent, Georgia, is unlike all the other deep southern states, they've had a lot of people from other parts of the country move in. And, Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Tidewater, a lot of people from outside the South. North Carolina, the Research Triangle, Charlotte, but in the Atlanta metro area, a lot of non-Southerners who are making the voting patterns less Southern, if you will, so that President Obama lost Georgia by 8 points, but that's real different from, say, Louisiana, South Carolina, a lot of the other Alabama, a lot of the other southern states where he got lost by much bigger margins, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it depends a lot on who Republicans nominate.
Okay. Are there any House races? I know you mentioned you expect Republicans to pick up anywhere from probably 1 to 10 seats in the House. Are there any House races that everybody should pay a special attention to as we go through the cycle?
I'm trying to think of one that would be interesting to anybody other than a political junkie.
Which I think we all are here tonight, right?
Well,
everybody?
yeah, but I'm lowering the bar here. Actually, we had, I was not in on the meeting, our House editor and several other people were in on it, a Democratic challenger in North Carolina to Republican Congresswoman Renee Elmers, and it was Clay Aiken, the former American Idol. I guess he came in second. I've never seen the show.
Don't look at me, Charlie.
Yeah, I was told that he was probably, he's got very, 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 very little chance of winning in that district, but that he was actually better than most of the other candidates that come through. He was actually, apparently was pretty intelligent, reasonably articulate, and that's 2 points above some of the people that, no, we have probably 200 candidates come through our offices every election cycle, mostly House, some Senate, a few governor, and I remember when Pat Roberts came in running for the Senate, and I had not hardly met him before then. Boy, he was funny. He was like Bob Dole without the national name, but a very humorous guy. But it was a fun meeting. I enjoyed that. But anyway, we have a lot of people coming through, and I remember when Mitt Romney came through when he was running for the Senate against Senator Kennedy, and John Edwards came through. That was interesting. And Sonny Bono coming through. That was a fun meeting. And then after he was killed, his wife, Mary Bono, came through, and that was a fun meeting. She came through with her dad, who was had been a World War II pilot, and he was really marveling some of the models that I had up in my office. So anyway, but it's fun. You just sort of get to see the country coming through one at a time.
Yeah, you referenced gubernatorial contests. Speak to those for just a few minutes.
Well, one thing that in politics, sort of a shortcut, is when you're looking at a certain kind of race is, okay, how long is the term and what happened the last time? So in the House, it's obviously a 2-year term. So you look back at the House, and remember in 2010, Republicans picked up 63 seats. And then they lost only 8 seats in 2012. And so you just didn't, you didn't have an unusually large number of people sitting in districts that God sort of didn't intend their party to have. And so there's just not a lot of give there. But in the Senate, with 6-year terms, you look back and, okay, we're at 2014, so you look back at 2008, we were in a recession, had just had the financial crisis, and President Bush's numbers were terrible. So Democrats had a huge year in 2008. So they come into this election cycle 6 years later with a bunch of seats that they didn't have, prior to 6 years earlier, and so Democrats are overexposed. But in the governorships, it's a 4-year cycle. Well, 4 years ago, the governorships that are up this time, they were the seats that were up in 2010. And so you had Republicans picking up a whole lot of seats in 2010, and Democrats, I mean, if there was a chance to lose in 2010, you did, if you were a Democrat. And so you've got, to the extent that there are Democrats up, they're a very hardy group, and then you have some Republicans, some few won under extraordinary circumstances. So there's sort of a unique vulnerability for Republicans this year because of which seats that are up. Now, that might be offset some by turnout and the president's numbers and things, but where Republicans are a little overexposed and have some tough governorships up in, Florida, Michigan, Ohio, places like that.
Okay. What do you believe the big story will be out of the midterm elections?
Well, I probably would have taken a dive a couple months ago, but it now looks, we have 7 months to go before the election. So we're talking about human behavior, all the normal disclaimers. Right now, it looks like more likely than not that Democrats will lose the majority in the Senate. And I think President Obama, 10, 20, 30 years from now, he will be remembered for better or worse for the Affordable Care Act in terms of substance, legislatively. But politically, if Democrats lose their majority, he would have been the president that presided over Democrats losing their House majority in 2010 and the Senate majority in the next midterm election, which, so the policy legacy, positive or negative, would be Affordable Care Act, and the political, more likely than not, will have been losing majorities in the House and Senate.
Okay. Any other thoughts that you want to share about the midterms coming up before I move to a different subject?
No, well, okay, a year ago, 14, 15 months ago, when I started looking at 2014 seriously, it struck me that there were two sort of competing dynamics, and the question was which scenario would be more powerful. And the first scenario is, would Republican problems that we saw in 2010 continue into 2012, that we saw in 2012, just sort of flow into 2014? Or will we see the classic second-term, midterm election dynamics where the party in the White House usually gets hammered in either the House or Senate or both, and with the president's numbers weighing Democrats down? And when I mean the first side, on the Republican side, it's, Republicans have some real problems. I think they're going to have a good election this year. But Republicans have some serious problems with minority voters, young voters, moderate women voters, and self-described moderate voters, that they're not big problems in the House where you have these on each side partisan and ideological kind of cul-de-sac districts that protect them from sort of the ebb and flow of national politics. But in statewide elections, competitive states, and presidentially, these are big deals. I mean, just as example, in 2004, George W. Bush got 44% of the Latino vote and was able to win re-election. This past election, Mitt Romney got 27% of the Latino vote and lost the national election by almost 4 points. A Republican can't, Romney won the white vote he won 59% of the white vote. Nobody's ever won 59% of the white vote before and lost a presidential election. But the country's changing. I mean, we've seen the share of the white vote has dropped from 89% in 1992, 89%, down to 72% in 2012. Just very, very consistently dropping. So Republicans, if they're only going to get, I think it's 6% of the African American vote, only 27% of the Latino vote. And how about this example? I think this makes the ethnic voting pattern. We're going to do something politically incorrect, but not, I think, particularly controversial. When I think of Asian Americans, I think of hardworking, entrepreneurial, capitalistic. Their kids generally get better grades in school than my kids do, higher household income than whites, lower unemployment rate than whites, and they typically are a little bit more conservative on social cultural issues. Wouldn't that suggest a Republican voting bloc? And Romney lost the Asian vote by 3 points more than he lost the Latino vote. And the vote for Congress, Democrat, Republican Congress, were almost identical. And when you look at that, there's no logical reason for that other than among a lot of minority voters, and I will say, I do not think this is an accurate or fair characterization of all Republicans or most Republicans, but minority voters perceive the Republican Party as a party of old white men. And to the extent that minority voters get that impression and that they are getting to be a bigger and bigger and bigger voting bloc, that's a problem for the Republican Party. They've got to expand. So are these Republican, as it turns out, I think the circumstances, the dynamics in this year overpower that and the fact that it's a midterm election. And conversely, the president's numbers, the Affordable Care Act, the turnout dynamics, all these things, they're just these factors are weighing Democrats down a lot more than these factors could have weighed down Republicans. But it doesn't mean that the Republicans have fixed their problems. It just means they got past this election without those problems weighing them down too much.
Okay. When you were here last time, which I think I figured out was 2007, and I want to move forward to the 2016 elections, which you kind of have started looking at here, but someone asked you to handicap Rudy Giuliani's chances in 2008. You remember what you said. You said...
Well, someone here tonight said that, well, wait, what did she say? Okay, what did you say? Because I changed what I said a little bit later, but I came up with something even better. But what did you say I said?
I asked you what, at the time it seemed like it was a good idea. I asked you what Rudy Giuliani's chances were in the presidential election that was upcoming in 2008, and you said I have a better chance of winning the Tour de France.
Oh, okay. See, I knew that I had begun saying that, but I didn't remember when I began. And there was only 1 week in the fall of 2007 that I started getting a little nervous. And actually some people in my office gave me a Tour de France shirt. But Giuliani's pollster is a friend of mine, and there was 1 week that I sweated a little bit, but then I came out of it fine.
Well, I wanted to ask you if you had singled out any candidate on either side of the aisle who's likely to make the race in 2016 that you'd like to lump into that group tonight.
Oh, no. First of all, the accuracy rate for prognosticating this far out is pretty darn close to zero. And so this is kind of a parlor game, and it's a lot of fun, but I don't think anybody's got a crystal ball. And at this point in 2006, I don't think you would have had many people say Barack Obama was going to beat Hillary Clinton. I mean, very, very, very few people. And that's not the only time we've had surprises like that. Going back, as long as we've been alive, you'd see, or almost. The Jimmy Carter's come through and other people that early on nobody thought. I think that those two dynamics that I talked about earlier sort of have Republicans fix their problems, and I would put it differently. I think what we don't know is what's the intrinsic value of each party's nomination. And the Republican Party, historically speaking, Republicans should win the presidency in 2016, because we know that there have been 6 of these elections since the end of World War II where one party had the White House for 2 terms, 8 years, and 5 times out of 6 they've lost the presidency. And the only time that a party won the presidency 3 times in a row since the end of the war was after 8 years of President Reagan, when his Vice President George H.W. Bush won. So, generally after 8 years, the sort of time for a change, let's do something differently, sort of disaffection builds up. So historically speaking, that's what ought to happen. But Republicans need to have addressed some of these problems I talked about for them to be able to do it. And then on the flip side is, what's the value of the Democratic nomination? Where's President Obama's approval ratings? And as I said, right now they're sort of in that 40 to 44% range, which is not a good place. President Reagan was at 51% when George H.W. Bush won. Where's the Affordable Care Act? And just how open are people to considering giving Democrats a 3rd consecutive term? And that could be high, it could be low, it could be in the middle. We don't know. In terms of, I would have a hard time seeing how. I mean, on the Republican side, there's sort of the old school Jeb Bush. I don't think Chris Christie can survive his problems, politically anyway. But let's just say Bush, Christie, and this school over here. Then you've got Tea Party Republican senators. So you've got Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. Then you've got the governors. And that's pretty much it on the Republican side. If it's a Tea Party senator, I think it's more likely to be Rand Paul win than Ted Cruz. I think it'd be hard for Ted. I think it'd be very very, 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 very hard for Ted Cruz to win to get a nomination or to win a general election. If it's a governor, I'd look at Scott Walker. Possibly Kasich, but the others that are looking at it, Bobby Jindal, Mike Pence, Rick Snyder from Michigan. I don't think their chance would be that great. But we're kind of watching Jeb Bush, and people close to him say most days there's about a 1 in 3 chance that he runs. Some days it may get up to 40%, but that they're just family reasons, not exclusive of his last name. People in the family, and not just his mother, that really, really, really don't want him to run. And I think it's whether you're a male or female candidate for president, I think it's very difficult to run with a non-supportive spouse, and I think that'd be a real challenge for Bush to do. I think he was a very good governor. I think he'd be a pretty good candidate. I realize there's some last name issues, but if your opponent's name is Hillary Clinton, it's not exactly a unique problem that you're carrying, but.
Well, speak to the Democratic side for a few minutes. I mean,
Yeah,
the assumption is the secretary will run, so talk about if she runs or if she chooses not to.
Well, I think, there are two sort of assumptions being made now. And one is that all decisions are political. They're not personal at all. And two, that it's an absolute moral, just certainty that she's going to run. Well, as I said with Jeb Bush, I think these are personal decisions as well. And I think there's a 30% chance or so that she doesn't run. And I've had people that were very, very high-level people close to her, top staffers, say they thought that 30% was about right, and that we've seen New York Times cite unnamed, very, very, very close friends who are urging her not to run. The reason, and I think she probably runs, and I think she probably gets wins the Democratic nomination. But right now she's 66 years old. She'll be 67, turn 67 in October of this year. so that when time comes like this time next year to make her mind up, she'll be 67, turning 68 in October of 2015, and 68 through most of the election year, turning 69 2 weeks before the election. I don't think people in their mid to late 60s make 9-year commitments lightly. I think they think about things real hard. And that's what it is, a 9-year commitment. 1 year to run, 4 years if you obviously hope you win, so 4 years for a first term, and 4 more years for a second term. I never saw a first term president that didn't want a second. When you sort of watched her over 4 years as Secretary of State, it was a grueling pace, and it clearly took a physical toll on her. I mean, she traveled to 112 countries, was on the road 401 days, and traveled the equivalent of 38 times around the globe. And you could just see it in her face that last year, that last 6 months. You remember the fainting and all that. Running for president, nobody has to tell her, is a lot more strenuous than being Secretary of State. And she's going to be 4 years older. And I guess it really hit me in December of 2007 when Senators Clinton and Obama were facing off in Iowa. I spent a day traveling with her and her campaign entourage around the state. And we met down at stairs in the hotel lobby at 6:30 in the morning, and we got back there a little bit before 2 a.m. And we were on airplanes, buses, just hopscotched all over the state of Iowa. That day beat the heck out of me, and I'm 6 years younger than she is, and I did that one day, and she was doing that every day. And so I'm just saying that, I think she's going to decide, do I feel up to this? How's my husband, comma, who's had quadruple bypass and 2 stents, comma, how's he doing? And when the heck is Chelsea going to give me a grandchild? These are decisions that she is a person.
Yeah,
she will be making it. Yeah, having said that, I think she probably runs, and I think it'd be very hard for someone to beat. I think, she will have opposition. Howard Dean might run. He'd like to run. Can't keep a good man down, Brian Schweitzer, former governor of Montana, populist, he might run. I think the only current elected official who might take her on would be Martin O'Malley, the governor of Maryland. But if she decides not to run, Katie bar the door. I think it would just be a, Cecil B. DeMille production of just, thousands of candidates. And we haven't talked about Vice President Biden. Now, Biden turned 74 about 2 weeks after the 2016 election. 74. Now, I've known him not well, but some for a long time, and he's a great guy, and one of the closest things to a normal person you will ever see at that level of politics. But somewhere out of 312 million people in this country, there's somebody that thinks it's a good idea for a 74-year-old guy to run for president, but I haven't met him yet. And I think if Hillary Clinton runs, that Biden would make the right decision and not run. The question is, if she didn't run, would he still make the right decision? Or to rephrase it, can he help himself?
Okay.
So, but that cast of thousands, and nobody, I don't think anybody has the slightest idea who would win the Democratic nomination if she didn't run.
Okay. I have one more question, then we're going to open it up to your questions and answers. We both got to Washington, D.C. in a very different era from the one that exists, in a very different political climate today.
In a better time.
In a much better time. What's going to happen with the huge amount of polarization and complete disinterest in cooperating on both sides of the aisle?
I think part of this bill, part of it is I think our society is edgier than it used to be. And part of it is there's just no middle left. When I came to Washington in 1972, you had a whole lot of conservative, moderate Democrats. You had a whole lot of liberal, moderate Republicans. And so that there was an overlapping, kind of like this, where you had Democrats that were more conservative than some Republicans. And today, it's like this. There's no overlap. There is not, even the most moderate Republicans in the Senate, Susan Collins, for example, is not as liberal as Nancy Kassebaum was, for example. Here, the conservative Democrats, like my old boss, Bennett Johnston. Richard Shelby used to be a Democrat. But you had some really, really, really conservative Democrats there. And to me, these people were the ballast that kept their party from going off into a ditch. Conservative Democrats sort of kept the Democratic Party from going off into a ditch on the left, and the moderate to liberal Republicans were the ballast that kept their party from going off a ditch on the right. Those people are gone, so there are no restraints there. And there's this attitude, and this is certainly not original to me, but that compromise is a four-letter word, and that you are it's a heresy. It's being a traitor to being just sitting down and hammering out a compromise. So that I think it would be very hard for a Bob Dole or a Lyndon Johnson to be Bob Doles and Lyndon Johnsons in this era. It'd be very, very hard. I don't think they could be as successful as they were in their times. And no, I tend to think that that we have sort of a pendulum in American politics, and that when the pendulum goes too far one way, something will happen that will bring it back the other way. I personally think that 9/11 could have been that, and that you remember the day after the tragedy, the attack, members of Congress, both sides, House, Senate, gathered on the Capitol steps, and they sang "God Bless America." And I remember thinking, well, maybe something good can happen from this horrible, horrible event. And then, and I don't blame either side exclusively for this, but the controversy, should we invade Iraq, yes or no? And that fight just split them apart, and to the point where it's worse than it was before. And so if you think, wow, my gosh, if a 9/11 can't be the thing that starts pulling the pendulum back, I hate to think of what it would take.
Okay, we're going to open up to your questions and answers. We have Zach and Quinn who have mics. Get their attention. Don't try to get my attention. And they will bring a mic by. I see like 6 or 8. There's one right over here, Quinn, right over here. I see a lot of hands, so we'll be patient. Let's start right here.
Charlie, I've heard you before. I've always enjoyed your presentations, and nobody's better, in my opinion, than you are at what you do.
Okay, so just stop and sit down right now.
But you mentioned the Senate races in Minnesota and Virginia. Could you talk about those two a little bit more?
Well, think this is, I guess somebody from Louisiana should not be using this metaphor, but, if it's a Category 3 hurricane, Democrats probably lose 6 seats. If it's of Category 4, maybe they lose sort of all 7 or 8 of the seats that I sort of talked about earlier. It would have to get to a Category 5 before you'd see, Mark Warner losing in Virginia, or Al Franken in Minnesota. I mean, it would take something. I mean, because right now it's not, the trend in both states from Virginia is moving from the Republican side to very much of a swing side, but it's been swinging pretty hard. Minnesota, it's not nearly as Democratic as it was in the Hubert Humphrey days, but it's still not an even Steven state by any stretch. So that you think of states, even Minnesota, the president's approval rating's probably in the, I'm guessing, low 40s. So that if he's not an asset, if he's not a liability, he's not an asset there. So that's just sort of what happens. And at a certain point, using the hurricane metaphor, at a certain point, identities of candidates become less important, and it becomes more parliamentary, where you're just voting. In 2006 and 2008, terrific years for Democrats, people were voting for blue jerseys and voting against red jerseys. And in 2010, they were voting for red jerseys and against blue jerseys. I mean, they just, at a certain point, no matter what you've done or who you are or even how weak your opponent is, if you're in a somewhat competitive state, you can lose. I mean, I had a Democratic consultant friend of mine says, about this year, every Democrat in an even remotely competitive state or district has to bring their A game. They've got to run a real campaign. They can't just, just sort of the kind of minimal effort that would have done fine for them in 6 or 8 could lose, or 12 could lose in a 2010 or a 2014. So, I mean, there are 4, I think, Republicans running, and I think there's a state legislature, I don't remember. I mean, this is like, we're talking about Minnesota would be like the number 9 or 10 state for Republicans in terms of likelihood.
Okay, we have a question back here.
So my question pertains to state politics. I'm wondering whether or not you might have any thoughts to share about the Connecticut governor's race.
Connecticut? Gosh. You say Connecticut? Heck, I could barely remember what, no.
So is it a Democratic seat?
Yeah, it's a Democrat state.
And you guys are calling it a Democratic seat?
But I couldn't tell you who the Republican candidate is. I used to know all this stuff on a micro level, but that was before I turned 60, and now I've got people that work with me that know this stuff inside and out. I'm sorry, I have to take the fifth on that one.
Okay, we have a question right here.
That's embarrassing.
Yes, little has been said about Kansas politics yet.
Oh, gosh.
There's been a lot of controversy here. What do you think particularly about the gubernatorial race?
Everything I know is secondhand. I know that our governor, Senate Governor Editor Jennifer Duffy, moved the rating fairly recently from solid to likely Republican, which, if I were going to translate, I mean, in our vernacular, it's solid Republican, solid Democrat, likely Republican, likely Democrat, lean Republican, lean Democrat, toss-up. And the lean and toss-up, those are the competitive categories. And the likely, it's not a competitive race, but it's got some potential. There's some reason to believe that it could possibly get competitive. And that's sort of, I know the governor's job approval ratings aren't quite what they used to be, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard for a Democrat to win statewide here. I mean, it's harder than it used to be, and and even then, it usually requires a real split. I mean, you all heard the line that there's sort of 3 parties in Kansas. There's a Democratic Party and sort of a, let's just say, a Bob Dole, Pat Roberts party, and then there's a more conservative party and Republican Party. And for a Republican to lose statewide, you have to have those divisions between the 2 Republican parties have to get particularly acute, and I'm not sure we're quite there right now.
Okay. Do we have a question? Okay, back here.
I was just going to ask about independent voters, where, if independents are a force at all anymore, and where do they stand on the Obama, unpopularity, and or where they stand going forward?
That's a great question, and I admit that I've evolved a little bit. I've spent most of my career fixated, some say obsessed, with independent voters. And the reason I was that you could count on 90% of all the people who identify themselves as Republicans voting for Republican candidates for, president, Senate, governor, et cetera, and 90% of Democrats voting for a Democrat candidate. So to the extent that there was a swing back and forth, it used to be independents. A couple things have happened. One, the nature of independents have changed a little. And in the sense, in 2 different ways. you know, there were some people that you would consider very, 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 very conservative Republicans. A few of them have now feel they would identify as Tea Party, really, and so they call themselves an independent, but in a Democrat-Republican race, you know, they're going to vote for the Republican every time. So that's changed the makeup of independents a little bit. Then there's a second group of moderate to liberal Republicans who have become disenchanted with the Republican Party, and so they now call themselves independents. Now, given a choice between a Republican and a Democrat, more often than not they will vote Republican, but it's not quite, you know, but again, so that the nature of independence is a little bit more Republican. But there's a third reason, and that is the Democratic Party identification has moved up some. And so you had in the last election, the gap between Democrats and Republicans was 6 points, with Democrats the larger number, which is somewhat on the wide side. Let me, okay, put that in a way that may mean something. Mitt Romney won the independent vote in 2012 nationwide by 5 percentage points, and yet he lost the election by almost 4. Now, nobody as long as we've had exit polls, has ever won the independent vote by more than 3 points, or by 3 or more points, and lost a presidential race. It's never happened before. But the gap between Democrats and Republicans has been so wide that you could win the independent vote by 5 points and not win the presidential election. We just had a Virginia governor's race where the Republicans nominated a very, very, very conservative candidate who still won 9%. Won the independent vote by 9 points, and yet lost the election by just a bit under 3 percentage points. So independents are a little different, and the gap between Democrats and Republicans has gotten wider, so that independents are a little less important. You know, it's not quite the split that it used to be. And so I've started watching voters, moderate voters, as opposed to independent. Now, 35% of all voters nationwide call themselves conservative. 25% call themselves liberals. But 40% call themselves independents. Actually, it's 41 in 2012. President Obama won the independent vote by, the moderate vote, by 15 percentage points. Now, assuming that he won, I can't remember what his percentage among liberals, but we can assume it was very, very, very high. You can't lose 40% of the voters, moderates, you can't lose them by 15 points and expect to win a presidential. And so now, sure, I look at independents, but I also look at self-described moderates also. You know, but what's a moderate? Is it somebody that's halfway between conservative and liberal? Okay, maybe. But maybe it's, here's an alternative suggestion. You know how, white, let's see, white is the, or is it black is, there was a physicist at dinner. Where are you? Or I don't know, any science major. Black is it black is the absence of color, or white is the absence of color? Black is the absence of color? Okay, what if moderate is the absence of ideology? What if it's somebody that just doesn't look at the world issues through an ideological prism? That they're just sort of sitting behind a plate like an umpire, instead of calling balls and strikes, something either makes sense to me or it doesn't make sense to me. It's either good for me or maybe it would be bad for me, but they just don't see things through a left-right lens. And I think in some cases that's who these people are. And that when these moderates, this certain kind of moderate, when they hear really, really edgy rhetoric, overheated rhetoric from either side, that they react in a hostile way. That they, you know, if the left has got an edgier, harder, sort of tougher, then they might move over to the Republican side, or if it's the conservative side, they may move a little more over towards the Democratic side. So I'm watching independents, but I'm now watching self-described moderates also, that it might be, it's certainly a different way of looking at it, and it may actually be a better, given the gap between Democrats and Republicans.
Okay. I have a question right here.
As you stated earlier that one of the issues for the Republican Party is to increase the minority vote, to raise those votes. What is the Republican Party doing to attract those votes? Because what we see is them oppressing those type of vote by proof for them to be able to vote. So I see that as a negative. So what are some of the positive moves that they're making?
Well, let me touch on that two different ways. I think, you know, the old story about the old line that, you know, when you're in a hole, stop digging. And you know, Romney got 27% of the Latino vote. We were talking at dinner, my guess is that self-deportation was good for a point or two. You know, just don't say stupid stuff, you know, don't, and in the, you know, in the Republican leadership, House and Senate, and quite a few Republican senators, they know, look, I mean, I know Senator McConnell has privately said, immigration is irrelevant for the 2014 elections. But in 2016, when there are a whole lot of Republican seats up in Obama states, where are Republican seats up in Democratic states, and when you've got the presidential election, that Republicans had better get the immigration issue, make it go away, pass something that is enough, get it out of the way so that we're not continuing to dig a hole by opposing this. And so you saw a comprehensive immigration reform get through the Senate, and where most Republicans voted against it, but they didn't lay across the railroad track. I mean, I think a lot of them wanted to vote against it, but they wanted it to pass. And so they didn't sort of lay across the railroad tracks and stop it. In the House, I know that Speaker Boehner would love to get something through, and really, really, really would. But the question is, can he get something through? So there's all that. So just stop saying stuff that sort of pokes these people in the eye. That's half of it. To your point on voter identification laws, to me, it's sort of what is the intent and what are the specifics. I personally have no problem requiring identification if states proactively go into all kinds of neighborhoods and make a concerted effort to get photo IDs, state IDs, into the hands of people that need them. And if they did that, then I would have no problem with it. Now, part of the thing is that I think some of the law, I think the intention and some of the people that have been pushing these things, I mean, the question is, are you concerned about fraud, or are you trying to keep the other side's vote down? I mean, that's basically, when you strip away everything, that's what it comes down to. I have no earthly idea why an expired driver's license is not a valid identification. I mean, just because you turn 90 and in a nursing home and don't drive anymore, I don't know that changes your identity much, you know? I don't know why a University of Kansas ID, well, I know in Texas, a University of Texas student ID doesn't count as an ID, but a concealed carry permit does. You know, I mean, so the question is, I mean, to me, if you'd played fair, if you did it straight, I've got no problems with it. But that's if somebody's concerned with fraud, then they should have no problem with going out and doing these things. But I think there are some people whose motives may not be entirely pure, and you know, and by the same, yeah. Anyway, let's
stop there. Okay. Let's go back here.
We're glad you could find yourself outside the Beltway, and welcome to the Heartland. I'm curious what you think of these two factors as they might impact the election. One, Harry Reid's beating up on our homegrown Koch brothers, and second, and naming them on the floor of the Senate. And secondly, the Supreme Court's sort of removal of the lid on campaign contributions.
You know, I guess one of the great liberating things about not being on either side is that I can kind of, I'm trying to find it, urinate on both sides. Are Democrats and liberals outraged over the Koch brothers and their spending? Yeah. Were they outraged when George Soros and Peter Lewis started doing it on the D side? I didn't hear a whole lot. And so I just don't, I have a fairly low tolerance level for selective outrage. You know, Tom Steyer, the hedge fund guy that is spending gazillions opposing Republicans who are in favor of the or anybody that's in favor of the Keystone Pipeline. I haven't seen Senator Reid attack Tom Steyer, who spent, I think it was $3 million in the Virginia governor's race. So, you know, I just sort of say, just show, if someone's consistently criticizing both sides, billionaires and multimillionaires, then to me they have a little bit more credibility than people that just are opposed to the ones that they disagree with. In terms of the court decisions, well, first of all, McCain-Feingold was a terrible decision. A terrible campaign finance reform law that is doing exactly what a lot of people predicted, that it would basically make parties less important and push the money out into sort of other darker pools. But once the Supreme Court decided that spending was a form of speech and couldn't be limited, then what that effectively meant is that for all intents and purposes, we have no campaign finance laws anymore. And it's just sort of Wild West time. And short of a constitutional amendment or the Supreme Court reversing ground, which I know there's some law professors here, doesn't happen very quickly, you know, I think we have what we have, and it's not likely to change. But all the decisions you're seeing today, to me, are a result of sort of that deciding that it was a form of speech, and if you accept that, then this is sort of the logical extension. But it is what it is, and so I just basically don't pay it. You know, to me, I just look at it like campaign money is fuel. It's like gas. It's like fuel in a racing car. It's better to have it than not. But that I don't make value judgments on it anymore. But I'd say, you know, both sides have had plenty of very, very wealthy people whose voices are louder than other people's, and so.
We're going to take two more questions. We have one right here.
Charlie, we're really glad to have you back and hope we don't have to wait too long to get you back again. Where do you see the Affordable Care Act now, and where do you see it going? And should the Senate should the Republicans take over the Senate this year and then the White House in 2016, do you think that they would attempt to repeal it? And if they do attempt it, what chances would they have?
Well, first of all, let's talk about where it is now. If you look at the polling, and most of the polling we're seeing is showing, if you say, do you approve or disapprove, or do you have a favorable, unfavorable opinion, or do you think it's good for the country, bad for the country, or good for you and your family, bad for you and your family. The negative, the downside on any of those variations, they were running about 9 to 16 points higher than the positive, okay? There have been a few polls that have it instead of 9, more like 5 or 6, but to the extent that there are numbers that show the Affordable Care Act less worse, I mean, still upside down, but less worse, that movement was sort of Democrats who had been for it, who had moved against it, or into undecided, now moving back for it. So there's been a little bit of movement among Democrats, but it's still pretty unpopular. I don't see it changing between now and 2016 or 2014. Someday it may very well be popular. I don't know, but someday in between now and November, and I tend to think it may not be between now and 2016, but that's obviously a little sketchier to know. I don't think, as long as there are 40 Democrats in the Senate, it can, something can be filibustered. But you can pass things under budget reconciliation, anything that's sort of money related. That's a little simplistic, but you could pass with a majority. If Republicans take the Senate this time, President Obama would still be able to veto things, and so unless they attach to something that he just absolutely couldn't veto, it's going to stick, or it can't be just absolutely repealed. Keep in mind also, though, that when you ask in polling, more people don't like it than like it, but most people are not in favor of repealing it. What they want is they want it fixed. I mean, they sort of don't want to go back to square one, but they know that this thing isn't, has problems. And in a funny sort of way, the two party positions are precisely, the American people, they more don't like it, but they don't want to repeal it. But Republicans, the line, at least up until pretty recently, and still with a lot of Republicans, it's repeal, defund, but that's not really where the American people are. But then you've got some people on the Democratic side that seem to think that the Affordable Care Act was the product of an immaculate conception and an absolutely infallible document. Well, that's kind of not right either. Now, from the Democrat standpoint, if you crack it open to try to fix it, a lot of Republicans would just try to kill it, which is obviously true. So we're at a weird spot where even to the extent that there's a willingness to fix certain aspects of it, there's a disincentive. On the Republican side, to say that you want to fix the problems, a lot of conservatives don't like that, because to them that means you're accepting its legitimacy by being willing just to fix it. And so we're really at kind of a bad place. Now, what do I think is going to happen? I think that it will be, I don't think it's going to be repealed, but I think significant portions of it are going to be repealed over time. The part of the problem for President Obama and Democrats is that if you look at the Affordable Care Act and you say, what is the one thing that people like more than anything else? And that's getting rid of exemptions for pre-existing conditions. That's the one thing that, I'm not going to say almost everybody, but a whole lot of people really like. Well, the thing about it is, you can't, to get rid of exemptions for pre-existing conditions, you almost have to have mandated coverage, because you need to get a lot of young, healthy people paying premiums to pay for really, really, really sick people, and you can't have somebody wait until they're healthy and then they get cancer and then say, oh, I better go get my get health insurance now that I'm sick. Well, you can't do that. And so the president and Democrats never really were able, never explained to the American people that to get what you want, you got to take what you kind of don't like, being forced to have it. That it's a package deal. You can't sever it. And because people haven't really wrapped their arms around that, they want what they like, they want to keep what they like, and they want to get rid of what they don't like, and don't realize that they're inseparable. And that's, you know, and I think, you know, the Democrats, you know, we got a shot now. Let's get this thing through back in 09 and 10. And, you know, we can get it through now. Later on, we probably can't. So they jammed it through without necessarily selling voters on it. And that was at a time, remember, when we were, you know, 2009, we were in a recession. I mean, you know, I remember, you know, through 2009, you know, you had 9% unemployment for consecutive, at 1.3 consecutive months. People were fearful. They wanted to focus on jobs and not health care. And so even to the extent that there was a time to take something like that up, 2009, 10 probably wasn't the optimal time to do it from the standpoint of people being open to something that's such an enormous change in our economy.
Okay, we have one final question back here.
Hi, I'd like to return to the question of voter ID laws, or some would think of it as voter suppression. However you frame it, it's a pretty expansive movement. I wonder how you think it'll shape the mechanics, the outcome, and perhaps the validity of the upcoming elections.
Well, I think that there's some, I think that voter suppression is not as widespread as Democrats think, and voter fraud is not as widespread as Republicans think. In fact, I've never seen, I mean, you could have whatever opinion you want to have on 2000 Bush Gore, but I've never seen a federal race stolen on Election Day. Never seen it. And I'm from Louisiana. Now, I'm not going to tell you that there aren't any sheriff's races that haven't been fixed somewhere, you know, something important. But a seat in the House or Senate, you know, not that many people are willing to go to prison for the outcome of a Senate race. I just think that each side has rather extreme fears of what the other side will do that are largely overblown. I think right now, because you've had so many, I think you've got, I mean, so I don't know, I seriously doubt if all the new laws, if they were in place in 2012, I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the Obama-Romney race. I really don't. Now, as I said earlier, do I think that the motives of some of the people pushing are unpure? Yeah, but I also think that there's some paranoia there. But I think there's also some paranoia on the Democratic side that voter suppression will, you know, eliminate all minority voting, which I don't think is the case either. I mean, for that matter, some of the voter ID laws will disenfranchise a lot of whites over 65 who have been voting awfully Republican lately. So I don't think these things are sort of zero-sum, helping one side, hurting the other. So I don't, as I said, I think both sides' fears and suspicions are a little overblown.
Charlie, thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Bill.
a very
Thank
informative
you.
program. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate your support. Senator Dole will be visiting next Tuesday. Pretty remarkable for a man who's 90 years old plus. And we will have a public open house here in Hanson Hall that will begin at roughly 11 o'clock. Be here early if you want to get in, because it'll be a full house. Thank you all for coming.